So we are in a new book. We are in Egypt. So we do know that everything which is here has really been not just predicted, but prophesized. It was part of the Brit Ben Abtarim and what God had revealed to Avram. So we are now with the new generation of Bnei Yisrael, Paru v'yishritzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu b'ma'od ma'od, v'tmalei haaretz otam, which absolutely sounds like a bracha. So one of the things about Galud is that Galud seems to provide us with certain, there's an agenda and it takes place. I mean, by the way, no one misunderstand me. It could be that it's already accomplished and you don't have to stay there any longer. But we do have to note that the Jews, somehow, it was necessary for them to multiply like this. Part of God's plan is that it takes place in Egypt. For that matter, we can point to the Torah being given in the desert, outside of the land. For that matter, the Talmud Bavli, which is quite influential, is something which comes from outside of land. So it's interesting how and when Galud is used and in what ways it's used, and obviously there's a lot more to talk about it. But in this particular case, this population explosion that takes place is something which is going to very much frighten our new king. Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yadad Yosef. Now, again, it doesn't say lo zacharet Yosef. Lo yada is interesting, and Chazal already look into it. Lo yada lo ratzal adat. Meaning, is this that he's trying not to recognize Yosef and he's trying not to be involved? Because again, arguably speaking, Yosef should have had an incredible impact on Egypt, on the economy, on the culture, and it's just so hard for us to imagine. On the other hand, maybe that's what we should imagine. No matter how big and how important and how influential, new generation comes and people forget the sometimes minor and sometimes even major characters from previous generations. So that itself is very is something which is worthwhile noting. V'yomer lamo hinei am b'nei Yisrael. So he calls them a nation. He identified them as a separate people. So already, I mean, if you want to, and I guess especially today, although it seems like every year we find reasons to, but one can listen carefully for the anti-Semitic overtones. They are a nation, but a separate nation. They're not regular citizens. They are this other element which are not to be trusted. Am b'nei Yisrael, Rav atzum mimenu. They're already becoming more numerous than we are. Hava nitchakmalo. So let's treat them in a clever way. And, this is the evil clever way, not the nice clever way. Pen yurbeh, lest they become even more of them. V'yaki tikrena milchama v'nosaf gam hu al sonenu v'nilcham banu v'ala min aretz. So then, this whole imaginary threat that he presents is that we are not loyal citizens. We're a separate nation. If there is a war, we're going to join the other side, and then we're going to leave. So now, if we're another nation, so what's bad about us leaving? If there's so many of us, then why do you want us there? So, are there contradictory elements there? Perhaps. Could you try to come out with an explanation that's going to reconcile the various elements? I'm sure that one could, but if we're dealing with a classic anti-Semitic diatribe, so I don't have to reconcile it. I can say they don't like us, we're not part of it, they don't want us to leave, they don't want us to stay, and let's find something useful for us. There are perhaps historically some reasons that may have led to this, and this new king may have been himself an outsider. And what is going on there, I'll just mention that, but I'm not going to go through any further conjecture. V'yisimu alav sarei misim leman anoto. So now they want to, and by the way, that word anoto is important because that perhaps is going to fulfill the Brit Bein Abtarim, that avdu v'inu oto, right? Abar Mochana. So anoto. So if you want to, you can even now imagine that this new Paro was quite familiar with Avram's prophecy, and essentially he's an Eved Hashem, ana avdu dekut shabrichu, and all that he's interested in is fulfilling God's word, and this is what God wants at this point. He wants them to be strangers in this land, and therefore he's now going to be abusing them as per the biblical prophetic tradition that he has received. So I hope you all find that somewhat absurd, but nonetheless, we can't ignore that word over here because it is important. And they enslave Vayivin Arei Miskonod LeParo Et Pitom Vet Ramses. No matter how much they're abused, they keep on multiplying. Yifrotz sounds like echo of the bracha that Yaakov receives. But then a real interesting word that I want to stay on a bit, Vayakutsu mibnei bnei Israel. So now what exactly does this word Vayakutsu mean? So a quick, accessible English translation is here below. They were filled with loathing because of the children of Israel. So Vayakutsu is not a nice word, but the question is, again, what does it mean? So if you look at source number 2, V'tomer Rivka el Yitzchak katzti b'chayai. So that would seem to be a similar word, mibnei benot chet. So Rashi here writes, katzti in source 3, ma'asti b'chayai. I find it disgusting. I mean, that's the word mi'us, which is very strong. That right then, we would then hear this, again, this anti-Semitic overtones, because they found the Jews despicable and disgusting people. Now, as I said, what I just now did is I found a word which is, I think, the same word. I found a Rashi explaining that word, although Rashi over here may not go in the same direction. So give me a second. But because we find it another place. And also it seemed to be an anti-Semitic episode in source number 4. Vayar Balak ben Tzipor kol asher asa Yisrael le'emori. Vayagar Moav b'nei Amod ki ravhu. By the way, very similar. Vayakotz Moav b'nei Yisrael. So let's look at the Rashis, plural. So Rashi, in the beginning of Shemot, which is where we started, Kutsu, Katsu b'chayehem. So now you understand how similar that is to Rivka, Katzti b'chayai, but it doesn't help us much, because when you translate a word based upon the same word, V'rabotenu, Omru, and we have a tradition that what this means is Kikotzim hayu beinehem, like thorns in their eyes, which is not a nice or pleasant thing. Rashi in Bamidbar, right, by Parshat Balak, so you see now why I had to go back to the other one, because in these other places Rashi just uses the same word, katsu b'chayim, and that's really the words of Rivka, katsu b'chayai. But there Rashi writes ma'asti, and I have no reason to believe that Rashi is looking at it differently. I would even like to believe that Rashi trusts us and trusts our memory, and the first time it came up, he gave us the definition. Then afterwards, he assumes that we remembered from the previous time. But that's important, because if this is the case, then we have these various episodes, which, yes, I think are important to compare, and that is Paro and the Egyptians' response to the Jews, and then you have in Parshat Balak, you have the whole beginning of that episode leading to Bilam, which is also, both of them have this disgust that they feel towards all of these Jews. The Jews are everywhere. And whether numerically we really are that much, or whether it's an exaggeration on the part of the haters, is also something which I don't know the real answer to. But nonetheless, I think it's interesting. We can skip a little bit and go down to the Chtam Sofer in source number 10. Vayakutsu b'nei Yisrael yesh lomar shezeh shahayu b'nei Yisrael lakutz b'nei Mitzrim or Mitzrayim asa kadosh baruch hu kidei shelo yitavu hamitzrim la'anot et nishei b'nei Yisrael. Now that is particular. I'll translate and explain, but that's particularly interesting, especially where we are again. And our minds are still post-October 7th, or maybe stuck on October 7th. But what he's saying is his concern. Again, let's just divide between two things. We have Paro and ancient Egypt, and we have the Chtam Sofer. So the Chtam Sofer is telling us, what's going on? That God made the Jews despicable in order to protect them sexually from the advances of the Egyptians, who would otherwise act in a most inappropriate way. I'm going to just stay where we're up to this in the Chtam Sofer, but I want to go backwards. Right? So we're going to come back to Chtam Sofer, but I want to go backwards and maybe just read a little bit further in the text itself over here. So we were up to Pasuk Yud Bet, Pasuk Yud Gimel, Vayavidu Mitzrayim b'nei Yisrael b'farach, right? They worked them hard. V'meru et chayim, they made their lives bitter, b'avodah kasha. B'chomel levanim, v'chol avodah b'sadeh, v'tkol avodatam asher avdu b'hem b'farach, again, making them work with incredible difficulty. V'yom melech Mitzrayim limeladot ha'ivriot, asher shem achad shifra v'shem hasheni pu'ah. So he approaches the Jewish, or now this is a little hard to translate, midwives, is it the midwives who were Jewish or the midwives for the Jews? So that is the machloket. One is shifra, one is poa. Vayomer biyaldechem et ivriot reitem et al ha'avanim im benhu vamtim oto v'hamitem oto. If it is a male, kill him. Ve'et bati ve'imbati v'chaya, and keep the girls alive. So now I just have to pause for a second and ask, why would this make logical sense to get rid of the males and to keep the females? I mean, what good can females possibly be? So I'm sorry for putting it like this, but if their whole concern is they really want this incredible building project to go on, they want unlimited pyramids, so it could be that some of the men may be strong and experienced and know exactly how to build pyramids, but when you are reading the whole context over here, it's almost unavoidable that the reason they're making them work is not because the projects are that important. The reason they're making them work is in order to tire them out and to punish them and to try to get rid of them. The instruction to get rid of all the new ones, we have enough Jews, we don't need any more of them, but kill all the men but keep the girls. So apparently Paro thinks that maybe the girls can come in quite handy as we move on. So I hope I am being delicate enough as far as what exactly this text is saying. But now you go back and you think about that Chatam Sofer. So, but before we go back there, but we're told that the Mialdot have fear of God and they avoid this. Now, again, that took a great deal of bravery to be able to do this. I've pointed out in the past that the language that they fear God, I think goes together with, those who remember or don't remember Yosef. That's what it says about Yosef when Yosef is trying to avoid sexual impropriety. So we're told that Yosef says to Eshet Potiphar, but I fear God. So it's interesting, to read this whole section over here with Paro's really bad intentions regarding the girls. He wants to fill up the harems. He wants there to be plenty of girls around for his own personal or perhaps for others' enjoyment and pleasure. And over here, their fear of God then becomes much closer to Yosef's in order to avoid any of that possible sexual impropriety. And we're told that nonetheless they keep on becoming numerous, and Paro comes up eventually with a better plan, and that is just let's kill them all and throw them into the river. And let's go back to the Chatam Sofer now. He writes that God did this in order to protect the Jewish girls. And then he's going into the Midrash, V'rak Shlomit bat Divri hayta mikashetet atzma b'dvarim ma she'ein ken shari anashim hayu ksherot. There was one woman of questionable moral character, while all of the others were ksherot. And therefore they were able to protect themselves so the Egyptian men would not go and be attracted to them. So it's really interesting because he's reading this anti-Semitic attitudes that exist from the Egyptians to the Jews, that the Jews are just so disgusting to them, that is a blessing from God in order to protect them during this exile, so therefore they won't be touched. And then he says something which is interesting, which is exactly what I was looking for and thinking of, and I'll have to spend the rest of the time trying to explain this. And then he says, but afterwards the Jews had all of this chen, and the Egyptians found them attractive. And it says, K'tiv ha'ish Moshe gadol ma'od, va'az hayu yor'im machmat mar'o gadol lahara kazot. But then they, at this point, had been so intimidated by that point, when it's told this is chapter 11, so already 9 plagues have hit them, so they were already too frightened to act on their negative instincts, And so therefore initially they find the Jews disgusting and therefore they wouldn't touch them. Afterwards they find the Jews, they're afraid of them, so they wouldn't touch them. So either way, in the Chatam Sofer's beautiful world, all of the Jews are unmolested. And all that I can say is I know that this is the Midrashic approach as well, and all I can say is halavai. Right? So I hope and wish that is, in fact, that is the case. He does something similar in Bamidbar when he comes back to the Moab, Bnei Israel. And again, in my mind, I just put these two texts together, not knowing immediately that others would. But again, I think it's obvious, and he saw, I think it's clear that Rashi and others thought they should be together, but he says it black and white. I already explained back over there. Kadosh Baruch Hu asazot kadei shiu b'nei Yisrael mu'usot kikotzim b'nei hamitzrim kadei shelo yishaltu b'neshotayim, in order to protect the women. Ad levasof natana Kadosh Baruch Hu chen ha'am b'nei Mitzrayim v'achinami lo ne'lam mibalak eitza lahachshilam b'benotayim kasher asa be'emet levasof beitzat bilam. And he says all of this about the sexual topic is in the background over here, and this also is going to be part of the eventual plan that Bilam is going to have. And I want you to keep Bilam in mind, because again, I think there's something interesting. Right? Moab, we're told, finds in discussing Yisrael. Right? They find the Jews disgusting. So therefore, what do we have to do? You have to take away the Jewish belief. As long as they're walking around with their stars of David, that's not going to work. We have to have them walk around instead with the star of, I don't know, of what do you want to call it, of Par, right? You have to walk around with a Par necklace, and then it'll work. And they had no idea how well this was going to work. And he quotes the Gemara that the greater the person, the greater the Eitzara. Right, so again, Bilam has his prophecy, and he sees Makor Mechatzev Kedusha Yisrael when he sees the greatness of the Kedusha. Ma Tov Olecha Yaakov she'im Chas v'Shalom Yivaer Bahem Eish Hayetzara Lo Yochlu La'amod Al Atzmam V'Yafru L'Fa'or V'Yavchu Datam Rachman L'Tzlan. Al Kain Amar Ha'itzacha. Again, I want to see exactly what he's referring to over here. Sheyaseh Amazeh Lamcha Eitza Asher Yafacha Amazeh V'Yu Amcha. So again, it's interesting because essentially what the Chatam Sofer is doing is he's presenting these two episodes as two sides of the same coin. One is the episode that takes place in Egypt where they are found to be completely disgusting. On the other hand, it says that when it came to that episode, which eventually the Jewish men are going to sin, so you have a similar or perhaps an inverse dynamic. I just want to note something which, again, all of us should have in the back of our minds, and maybe this is going to help us a lot in terms of understanding it. In source number 12 and 13, we have the same midrash. It's the midrash that tells us that Paro had a number of advisors. The way it's found in the Gemara, Hainu Amar B'Lezem Dichtiv, Kib Devar Shezadu Aleim B'Kedera Shebishluba Nitbashlu. In the pot that they were cooking is how they got cooked. My mashma, I mean, what are we talking about? The Hayzadu Lishna Dikederahu Dichtiv Bayazid Yaakov Nazid Amar B'Chia Bar Abba Amar Rabbi Simai Shlosha Yuboto Eitza. So again, it's interesting because what he was here talking about was the Eitza of Bilam. There were three involved in this, in advising Paro: Bilam, Eov, and Yitro. Bilam Sheyatz Neherag. Bilam, who gave advice, he was killed. Eov Sheshatak. Eov, who was silenced, Nidon B'Yisurin, he went and experienced his own pain and suffering. Yitro Shebarach, Yitro ran away. Zachumi B'Reimav Sheshu B'Lishkat Gazit. He ends up joining the Jewish people, and he ends up having illustrious descendants. In Shemot Rabbah, as I said, it's very, very similar. It starts also with the TORAH. I don't know if I need to read this as well. It's, again, almost word for word. Note, because you didn't know what he was talking about the cooking and about the Zadon. And so look at source 14. Vayomu Yitro, Baruch Hashem. This is Parsha Yitro. This is when Yitro arrives. Asher hitzil etchem miyad Mitzrayim umiyad Paro. Asher hitzil et ha'am mitachat yad Mitzrayim. Ata yadati ki gadol Hashem mikol Elohim ki b'davar asher zadu aleim. So the question is, what does that mean? Asher zadu aleim. So Rashi writes, Asher zadu, Asher hirshiu. V'rabotenu darshu lashon v'yizid Yaakov nazid. B'kadera asher bishluba nitbashlu. So I know that this was not completely clear yet, but let's try to make a little bit sense out of this. Yitro runs away, right? Yitro runs away. Okay, so we have the three advisors. Paro says, what are we going to do about the Jewish problem? So Bilam says genocide, right? Now, it's interesting, the word which is in both the Bilam and in the Paro episode, that's where we started, this idea that they found them disgusting, and Bilam then seems to realize we have to get past this. But what do they find disgusting? It's our religion. They don't like our religion. They don't like Jews. Again, this is not the modern, where Christ killers and so on and so forth. They didn't like us as Jews, and therefore we need to somehow solve the Judaism, and that's where the Pahor comes in. So therefore, according to this, the Baal Pa'or is performed in order to get the Jews to sin sexually. And again, it's interesting to read that section. Which was the worst sin? Was the worst sin the sexual misbehavior, or was it they reject God and are worshiping Pahor? I think if you read through that section, you at least have a question. It's not as simple as it's being presented over here. Let me put it like this. But what's interesting is the other two. Of course, Eov is going to be a question. Eov is silent, because that's what Eov is. He's silent. And therefore, Eov can't feel anybody else's pain. And, to be completely clear, if you're Switzerland during a Holocaust, you're not neutral. Being neutral against a genocide is not neutrality. It is being complacent. And therefore you cannot feel the pain of others, then perhaps you need your own pain to be able to respond. So over here, when Paro and Bilam are discussing the final solution, and Eov is silent, so therefore his silence is one which causes him to deserve his own punishment. But again, what did we read about Yitro? Yitro barach. Yitro ran away. So now, where did we get the barach from? Barach is also a good word. So let's just go down a little bit. We'll try to come back to some of these. So if we go back to Moshe, source 18, right? So Moshe comes, gets involved. You're going to kill us. So Moshe is davar, right? Vayishma Paro to davar ezev v'yivkesh laharoget Moshe vayivrach Moshe b'bnei Paro v'yeshev be'eretz Midian v'yeshev ala be'er. So the bricha of Moshe, the running away of Moshe, here is parallel to the running away of Yitro. And where does Moshe run away to? Of course, he runs away to Yitro, so therefore we have a runaway path over here. So it's interesting, because it sounds as if Moshe is following a path which already existed before, and who created that path? That was the Yitro path, the Yitro runaway train. Yitro ran away from that genocide, and Moshe runs away, and again, there's obviously a lot more to say about this. I just want to, say in passing that, Moshe at this point is trying to do the right thing. If you want to compare Moshe to the three advisors of Paro, Moshe over here is getting involved. By the way, it's very interesting to compare to the three, because according to the Midrash, we mentioned before, Shlomit, yeah, she was saying shalom to everybody. Shlomit Bativi, thank you. So she was the one who talked too much. But according to the Midrash, that's what the fight was about. The fight was that Mitzri had walked out of her bedroom, and after having sent her husband to work the night shift, and he comes back and finds this guy walking out of the bedroom, and therefore that's where they started to fight. So again, it's interesting to me that, again, the advisors over here, and the context of this. So Moshe's running away follows Yitro's running away. Yitro thinks that all of this is immoral, which then creates, even before Yitro becomes a believer, Yitro is nonetheless a moral person. Moshe gets involved because there's immorality which is taking place, and Moshe tries to stop the immorality, and therefore this Egyptian is guilty, and therefore what Moshe is doing is the correct thing. There is an interesting midrash that I just want to note on Pasuk Yud Tet, right? So Moshe tries to save the Jew and the Jews, and therefore gets involved, and he's told, go mind your own business. And that's where, and not only that, apparently they tell on him, and they report Moshe, which means over here you have people who are not ready to be redeemed. The Redeemer is there trying to redeem them, at least in some sense. If you want, perhaps in a micro sense, he's trying to save some people. And instead what happens is he gets reported for committing a crime. Okay, I guess it could be a crime to kill an Egyptian to protect a Jew, but why would a Jew go and report Moshe for doing that? And Moshe runs away. Rav Soloveitchik, by the way, builds up very much on the idea that Moshe runs away disappointed, thinking these Jews are not ready for redemption. Who knows when they'll ever be ready? But they don't want to leave. I mean, they identify with the slave mentality. They tell on Moshe for protecting a Jew, and apparently maybe this is not going to happen. And by the way, till this point, Moshe has not received a prophecy, but he's received perhaps a tradition. Maybe he has been taught the Brit Bein HaB'Turim. Nonetheless, you juxtapose this with Moshe coming out and seeing these girls being picked on. Again, Moshe's protecting the woman, he's protecting the victim. So you have a Yeshua, you have a redemption taking place. And Moshe, who could not be the savior in Egypt because they chase him away, and then Moshe becomes a savior here. So now the girls come home, and we've discussed this many times, and Yitro, only a father of 7 single daughters, could speak with such disappointment. And he says, an Egyptian man saved us. So essentially all work was done quickly, and a man saved us, and where is he? And they invite him over. I find it interesting that they feed him bread. I'm not sure how the bread works with the Egyptians not eating bread or eating bread with Hebrews. I'm not sure exactly what to do with all of that, but I did want to mention the Midrash. It's in Midrash Rabbah and Shemot and some other places. When they say Vatomarna ish mitzri hitzilanu, the Midrash says, but it can't be Moshe because Moshe is not a Mitzri. So yes, there's one approach to the Midrash. He's not a Mitzri. He dressed like a Mitzri. There's a terrible, terrible continuation of that Yosef is described as a Ivri and Moshe is described as a Mitzri, and therefore Yosef is buried in Egypt, and therefore Moshe couldn't be buried. Yosef is therefore buried in Israel, and Moshe is not, because he looks like an Ish Mitzri. Now, how much are you going to blame Moshe, who's born there, grown up there? Did you expect? I mean, where is he supposed to find a Bekasha store? Where is he supposed to find himself a frock? I mean, just think about that for a second. It doesn't seem to me to be all that serious, all that simple or obvious that Moshe should have been dressing otherwise. And that's one approach in the Midrash. But the other approach is fascinating, because when it says Ish Mitzri Hitzilanu, an Egyptian saved us, they say to Moshe literally, Yasher Koach. That's what the Midrash says. The girls say to Moshe, Shkoyach. Why? Because they're nice from girls. What do from girls say when an Erlich Jew does something good? They say Yasher Koach. So they say Yasher Koach. And Moshe says, it wasn't me. He says, what do you mean it wasn't me? He says, it was all because of the Ish Mitzri. He goes, what Ish Mitzri? He goes, the Ish Mitzri who was beating the Jew. So that he's the guy that saved you. That's where it came from. Meaning, Moshe's telling the whole story. How did I end up here? I ended up here because I saved the Jews, because of Ish Mitzri. So it's the Ish Mitzri that saved you. Don't thank me, it was Ish Mitzri. Now, first of all, this Midrash is tapping in to an incredible level of Moshe's modesty. Moshe's modest. I don't want any credit. It wasn't me. It's just because of circumstance that I ended up over here. The other thing is, when you think about Moshe's final action, as leader, or where his leadership's taken away, and that's, of course, when he hits the rock and makes it sound like he is making the water come out of the rock, as if he's taking credit for it. So if Moshe gets his position as savior because he takes no credit, then he loses it when he takes credit. So I just thought that was really an interesting Midrash, and I don't think it's the one that we normally pay attention to. So who wrote to me? I don't know who iPhone is. Lo Shinu et Big Adam. So I'm going to tell you a secret about that. You're correct, or it's actually levusham, levush wasn't changed. Yes, we're familiar with the teaching. The Jews didn't change their names, and they didn't change their language, they didn't change their clothing. There's also a fourth one, maybe they didn't reveal their secret. That they didn't change their clothing, the bigadim, or the levush, is not there in, I'll say, 90% of the midrashim that speak about this. There may be one odd midrash that mentions it. This was actually after the Jews left the ghetto teaching, where they said, the Jews 3 things, and one of the things is not changing the levush. It is very important till today in Hasidic circles not to take the levush of the modern people, of the non-Jews, and it is actually a very modern teaching, and it is not really there. I know I'm qualifying it, but it's not really there in the ancient sources. It only became popular after the Jews left the ghetto as a counter to leaving the ghetto, not to change the levush, and I'll leave it at that. But if you go, again, you start looking for it, you'll see it's not really there as much as one would have thought that it's there. Okay, so let us continue, because there was a place that I wanted to get to. What we have over here, and again, I want to go back, a bit. We have the Jews who are looked upon as being disgusting. If you look at the Netziv in source 16, v'yokutzim v'nei b'nei Yisrael od hayu mikatzeh chayim sharu hachashuvim shebahem anshei gdolei ha'erech. So the Netziv, it's great what he just now did. He flipped it around. He goes, why do they find the Jews disgusting? Because they knew deep down how important and how smart and how successful they are. They saw how many Nobel Prizes the Jews are going to win. And again, you have to love it's not what the pasuk says. I just want to say this, but it's what the Nesiv wants to say. It's the Egyptians felt like worthless, irrelevant people next to the Jews. So it's so great that somebody can give this interpretation. And he goes, V'gama pirish b'seder b'midbar. Right, and he goes straight to Parshat Balak. And he goes, but think about it; it's the opposite of originally. When the brothers of Yosef came, what happened? Second look at source 17. Why? Look at this. We got one Yosef, and look how he changed the economy, and he's so smart. And Paro said, is there anybody as smart as him, anybody as capable? What would happen to Egypt if they had 10 Yosefs? Well, first of all, if they had, or not even 12 Yosefs, if you have 12 of them, the problem is 11 of them or 10 of them will try to kill one of them. That's one problem you're going to have. But can they get along with one another? And Yosef actually pushes them away from the limelight. But he's noticing over here, come on, the Egyptians knew how talented and how great the Jews are. So therefore, it's an extension of Lo Yadat Yosef. They know Yosef and the brothers and how great they were. But he's like doubling down on that. That's what it really means. We'll go to the flip side. When God speaks to Moshe by the sneh, right? Perek Gimel, the burning bush. There are stages over here, and we're not going to read everything. We're not going to read the whole chapter. But what we do see is that God comes and God gets involved in history, and God sees and hears and understands and wants to help. And as he's telling Moshe all the things that are going to happen, you're going to come serve on this mountain, and you're going to be taken out and gather them together and let them know you're going to take them to Eretz Zvat Chalav Udavash, and they're going to listen, and so on. And then towards the end, Pasuk Yutet, and he goes, I know it's not going to happen as easy as I'm describing it till now. And therefore, I'll be able to strike them, with all of my power, which I'll do in their midst. And only then they're going to send them, which means there's a process. This is not going to happen as quick as you want. It's not going to happen immediately. There's a process, and they're going to get punished. So now, this is the flip side of what we saw before. The flip side of finding them despicable or loathsome is that they're going to find them, they'll find the chen, they'll find them so wonderful. When you say Tfilat Haderech, it's one of the things that you say is that people should see your chen. People should see the good side of you. People should see how wonderful you are, and therefore, why? Because people are scared, and xenophobia, and people are scared of strangers, and they only see the negative. So the tefillah haderech that we say is that we want people to see the positive side of us. So when the Egyptian slavery begins, they only see the negative and they find it loathsome, which again, the Chatam Sofer says there's a silver lining in that. But now God says, no, when they leave, they're going to see v'natati et chen ha'am hazeh be'einei Mitzrayim. The Egyptians are going to see you, okay, perhaps in a different light, and see the positive. And I'll read that as, and therefore, when they leave, they won't leave empty-handed. V'sha'ala isha bishchenta u'megaret beita klei chesef u'klei zahav u'smalot v'samti et b'neichem v'al-benotechem v'nitzaltem et Mitzrayim. And then when you leave, you're not going to leave empty-handed. It gets in some detail. You're going to go and you're going to take all kinds of things, silver and gold and clothing and so on, and you're going to empty out Egypt. So let's keep in mind, going back to the Brit Bein HaTarim, which I keep mentioning. But Yomer Lavram, source 21, Yodea Teda ki ger yazaracha be'eretz lo lahem, v'avadum v'inu otam v'bramot shana. Right, that's the inui that we mentioned before, the avdum that we saw along the way. V'gam ha'tagay asher yavodum dan anochi. But there's going to be a judgment take place. Of course, you can ask why they should be judged. They're following God's plan. Well, let's judge to what extent they're following it. By the way, no one said over here anything about killing babies or throwing them into the river or so on. V'acharei chen yitzu b'ruchush gadol. And then they're going to leave with great wealth. So now you realize here that the judgment which is taking place, which is really in the previous source pasuk kaf v'shalachti et yadah, they're not going to go right away. V'keti et Mitzrayim v'chon neflotai. The judgment is going to cause the punishment and plagues and suffering. And on the other hand, when they leave, they're not going to leave empty-handed, which means I'm really think that that's the way that we should be reading this as directly connected. So, but I just want to sharpen this, because we're going to find a bunch of different opinions as to why we're going to leave B'ruchush Gadol. Which means, if God wanted us to have money, there's lots of ways to do it. First of all, and again, I'm not getting paid to give God advice, but if He wants to take it, we can have great oil reserves, in our country. It seems to work well. By the way, I also think that we should work as hard as possible to support and to create, other types of energy. The electric cars, I think, are wonderful. If we can get rid of all of the dependency on oil, it will change not just the politics in the Middle East, it changes the influence that certain countries are having on American colleges by giving all of that oil money over. I mean, again, just realize what's going on. If suddenly all of that oil money disappeared and there was other types of energy uses, there are absolute implications to all of this. But that's it. I'm stopping to talk about politics. But what I do want to understand is, if God wanted us to have money, there's lots of ways to do it. We could have found gold along the way. We could have found it. It could have been all kinds of ways. Again, I don't have to give advice to this. So let's start with the Chizkuni. Chizkuni says, source 22, Lo tuchlu rekam, ki hem ya'aniku lachem mi shlosha minim, kesef v'zahav v'smalot, l'kayem yatzu b'ruchush gadol, dugmat hanakat eved son Garon v'yekev. So what he did a couple of things here. First of all, he said, this is halacha, that God keeps halacha, which means we're going to find that when servants or slaves are released, that we need to send them with a ha'anaka, we need to send them with something. So over here, Kodesh Baruch Hu follows halacha, so when the Jews leave, they have to leave with things. So therefore, even though the Egyptians may not want to do this in their own free will, and yes, just like God is going to harden his heart in order for him to get punished, God is going to soften their hearts in order to open up the bank account and the wallets and give away the silver and the gold. But why? Because it's halacha. So again, I want you to hear that clearly. The Chizkuni is starting us off and telling us there's a halacha that they have to keep. In source number 23, and I'm sure this is not the first or the only, but it was available, the Ketav Kabbalah writes, Lo tuchlu rekam, biyadayim rekanim. They're not going to go empty-handed. Bilti kabbalat schar al avodatchem ze shanim rabot. So essentially, what is it? It's payment for work. The truth is, you can see this in the Gemara as well. The Gemara pretty much says this, but as I said, this is very succinct and clear. So while the Chizkuni is saying it's halacha because that's how you release a slave who worked for free, quote unquote, all this time, but when they leave, you have to give them something. While the Ketav Kabbalah is saying no, It's as if saying, in retrospect, they were never slaves because they deserve the payment for what they did, which means you had no right to enslave them. So there is both the Chizkuni and the Ketav Kabbalah are essentially giving you a halachic argument, but they're giving you two different halachic arguments. One is giving you in terms of rules of people that work for you, and the other is rules of slavery, which means it would be in two different books in the Rambam in terms of what it is, what the payment is over here. I saw Rav Asher Weiss gave a shir that he wrote up. It's actually in his book, but with lots of changes that he was sent out last week. And the Yisachar and Zvulun relationship. So essentially, should it be in the laws of Matanat Aniyim, laws of Tzedakah, or should it be in the laws of Talmud Torah? And there's nafkaminas that he had. I would think that there's a third possibility. It could be in the laws of shutfut, the partnership. So therefore, again, if you just want to play with this a little bit, it's the laws of tzedakah. So then whoever, laws of tzedakah means you give to somebody who's closer to you, somebody who's a closer relationship, someone geographically, aniyeh ircha should take precedent. Or even though you can argue, Yisachar and Zvulun do not live in the same cities, that would seem to reject that possibility. If you say it's a law of Talmud Torah, so then perhaps it has a complete, meaning this is how this person's connected to Torah, and it actually very much sounds that way from the way the Shulchan Aruch writes it. Shutfut would have a terrible nafkamina, because if it was Shutfut, so then they're partners. So what happens if the businessman loses money that year? So I guess the yeshiva bachar has got to pay him back, because they're partners. So therefore, he's at a deficit, and he has money. He's got to take care of him, because that's what happened with partners, and that's a Dvar Torah that will never be said in a yeshiva. So we'll just leave that on the side. But it's interesting over here, the difference between the Chizkuni and the Ketav Kabbalah is how I analyze this. The laws of Avadim, the laws of slaves who were freed, that they need to go with some kind of a parting gift, or no, they were never slaves, and they need to be paid because they had worked during this time. Tzedel Derech, V'linir lafaresh v'shala isha mishkanta, and so on. Sha'ala ve'ein kan isur g'devat dat, kevan shagufam shemitzrayim haya mutar la'abed b'gzerat Hashem yitbarach, shemetu b'choreihem v'achareihem nitvu bayam. He says essentially, there was no prohibition of taking anything, because they're all dead people walking, and they had no rights to anything anymore, because they're all about to die. How's that for an interpretation over here? A little different from all the others. Yeah, you can take what you want. Since all of them are going to die, you could certainly take any of their money, and therefore he sees the taking of the money as a precursor to understanding that what's going to happen. And then he continues. And so on. He says, no, they didn't follow what the Brit Bein Habatim said. They went further, so therefore they essentially have forfeited their rights to all kinds of things, including their lives, including their money. So just go take whatever you want. So it's interesting because he's actually reading that you're going to go Rishus Gadol. That's part of Dan Anochi. I'm going to judge them, and therefore they're going to go Rishus Gadol because they're not deserving of holding on to anything which they own anymore. The Medrash HaGadol is really interesting because he writes, V'shala isha mishkatam, right, and so on. Zu mitzvah taseh. It's one of the Taryag mitzvot. One of the Taryag mitzvot is that when you leave Egypt, you need to take it. And the reason why it's interesting is look at source 26, because that's the Medrash HaGadol back on Perek Gimel, but Perek Yud Aleph, what happens? V'tin Hashem chena am b'nei Mitzrayim, and again, we'll have to look at this verse soon. Yochel Moshe v'Aaron lo nutnu min habiza, efshir she'avor al hasevel al lo taseh. Talmud lomer gama ish Moshe gadol ma'od be'eretz Mitzrayim melamit shehayu mafkidin etzlo piktonot. He goes, how can you say that Moshe went against the halacha and he didn't take anything? So he says, no, it must be the people, when it said that the estimation of Moshe was so great, it must be the people were throwing things at him as well. Moshe take this, Moshe take that. Now, we're still missing something over here. But as I said, this is radical, because it's saying not just you're allowed to take, you can take. No, it's a mitzvah to say. And again, he doubles down on it by saying, how could it be that Moshe didn't take? So it has to be that Moshe took. Lishi tatam, it had to be Moshe take. And yes, the Medrash HaGadol is found in the Geniza in Egypt, so maybe there's a little bit attitude there against the Egyptians over here. I could just imagine who's writing it, at which point it's being written, and says, no, everyone's got to take. This is a mitzvah to say. These people are horrific people, and we need to take what we deserve. And it almost sounds like an ayin tachat ayin kind of thing here, but as I said, he just goes a little further than everyone else does. Look at the Rashbam, because the Rashbam is beautiful. He says, what do you need to take klei kesef and klei zahav? He says, tachshitin l'chvod hachag, shetachugu b'midbar. It's going to be yantiv. They need to have nice jewelry. Yes, all the men, you know the halacha. You need to buy your wife's jewelry before the chag. So what if there's no jewelry stores to buy jewelry, but there are some people who have jewelry? So he says, yeah, this fits completely into this idea. It's not that it's not the payment, and it's not the former slaves. No. You need nice clothing. You need nice jewelry for Yantiv. We don't have any, so therefore we had to take. So as I said, he's just taking this in a completely different direction. We had the Chtam Sofer before. We can go back to him. V'shala isha mishkentas, source 28. Hodiewa takach achar sheratza Moshe ben Hashem aldiu shmo gadol shebo ya'asen niflaot gedolot ad ein cheker u'mispar. וידע שזה איננו שלם כל זמן שניצצות הקדושה מושקעים. Totally going Kabbalistic on us, that there are holy sparks that need to be taken out. By the way, that is one of the explanations that we have for exile, that there's holiness that somehow needs to be elevated. And there's all kinds of implications of this concept. V'kol zman shelo yatzu kol tzvot Hashem me'eretz Yisrael lo yazeh, al kein hodiu v'shela isha, klei kesef v'klei zahav, v'yadua d'hainu anitzatzot hakdushot asher liket Yosef et kol hakesef v'yom l'Mitzrayim, v'heim asher otziyam Yisrael v'yinitzlu. What are you talking about? That was our money to begin with. Yosef was the one who collected all of this. So we're just taking out our family's money. We're taking it out, which kind of seeped into the Egyptian economy, and therefore it's all holy. It's part of Yosef's providing food for everybody, taking care of everybody. It's Yosef's money. And you also realize this is not such an easy read, but it's fascinating nonetheless, that he's saying that essentially it's our money, so we're just taking it. It's our heirlooms that were borrowed by the Nazis during the war, and we're taking it back. This is ours. It's not even payment. It's not payment for working. It's not payment for leaving. No, this was our money, and we're taking it. So first of all, I really hope that you appreciate how many different directions we have. People trying to explain, this idea that we're taking the money. We're going to move and see a couple things from Rav Soloveitchik. So this is in the Chumash Masoret Rav. If you don't have it, you should have it. I think it's the best thing to go to. If you don't have a Dvar Torah, go straight there. You'll find Rav Soloveitchik on each pasuk. Great job by Dr. Arnie Lustiger. I actually was in contact with him a little bit about this, but you'll see something interesting soon. This he's taking from the Siach Hagrid Haggadah, and he writes as follows: I will put this people's favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. It will come to pass when you go, you will not go empty-handed. God reveals this deed to Moshe well before the liberation has even commenced, because this promise was an integral part of the Israelites' liberation from slavery. A slave has no rights of acquisition. Everything that the slave owns belongs to the master. The fact that the Egyptians would allow the Israelites to acquire their own possessions clearly demonstrates their newly freed status. So the Rav just turned this into halacha in terms of leaving. I mean, by the way, he does the same thing in terms of the Seder night. We tell over to our children, we're telling testimony. A slave is pasol la'edus. A slave can't tell over testimony. So therefore, the events that take place in leaving Egypt are themselves things which help turn us into free people. So over here, the ability to own possession, so therefore that act where the owner of the slave gives I want to stress something, former slave possessions, because normally whatever a slave picks up, and by the way, pure halachic analysis, what a slave picks up belongs to the master. So now if the slave can own something by himself, ergo, he's no longer a slave. So that's really what the Rav is doing over here. He's saying is that this is going to show that they're freed. Furthermore, the freeing of slaves is often a degrading experience for the slave, since he is penniless when he leaves his master. Gifts are only given to one who is respected. Not only will the Israelites be freed from slavery, they were respected by the Egyptians. Now, it's this last part that I actually want to come back to and develop a little bit more. Touch one more thing. This idea that the Jews were seen in a disgusting way. In source 32, we just have another example of it. This is when Moshe and Aaron finally went to Paro, and Paro then says, I never heard of God, then doubles down and says, you're going to have to go collect your own wheat, and so on. And the leaders who were told, Moshe and Aaron were told, the leaders who are told this are horrified, and that's source 32. V'ifku et Moshe et Aaron nitzavim lekratam b'tzitam eit paro v'yomer aleim yireh Hashem aleichem v'yishpot asher hivashtem et reichenu b'nei paro b'nei avadav. So what does that mean? So the English translation that I found writes, "For you have befouled us in the eyes of Paro." So what does befouled mean? So you see this little footnote. Literally made our odor stink. You made that it's like a week-old herring, which you find. There's one guy who occasionally comes daven in my shul. He davens a lot in the morning, but he told us a legend. This is a legend that we can't forget. He said that the legend is there was one guy in his shul in Queens. The shul closed down. The guy, I don't believe, is alive. But he would come to the Kiddush, and they would see that he would take herring home. He would take herring from the Kiddush and put it in his pocket. So I don't want to think about that all that much. Could you imagine if he left that? I don't even know how you put herring in your pocket. But can you imagine if you find the herring in your pocket from 3 weeks ago? So that's the image that I have right over here. So you're thinking you made our odor stink, just think herring in the pocket. That's what it is. The Jews left the Kiddush, they'd had herring in the pocket. But that's what they're complaining. You're making us disgusting. By the way, that's a great thing to say. Until now, they thought so much of us. Until now, they loved us. So, by the way, the same term is used by Yaakov. In source 33, Yamakav Shimon v'Levi achartem oti lahav isheni. It's the same word. You've caused trouble, making me repugnant to those who dwell in the land. So I don't know. Yeah, and over here, by the way, same translation, same work. Repugnant, literally to make me reek. So I don't know why they. In the two places, they gave different definitions. Made our odor stink, make me reek. Okay, but it is the same thing, and it's interesting because that has to be canceled, or reversed. So now let's go back to the verse that I already mentioned. This is when it gets actually implemented. Vayomer shel Moshe od nega achad avi al Paro v'al Mitzrayim v'acharechein yishlach etchem mizeh, and so on. Daber b'nei el ba'aznei ha'am v'yishalu. This is why it becomes a mitzvah to say. V'yishalu ish me'et re'eo v'yisha me'et ru'otak l'kesef v'chlizav. V'yitein Hashem etchein ha'am b'nei Mitzrayim. Yeah, it's going to work because God is going to make them favorable now, which again I'll say is the opposite of the attitude they had at the beginning. So here again, Rav Soloveitchik, this is the Chumash Misar Torah, page 83. Unique to Egypt was the fact they respected Moshe as a human being, not a super being. The Egyptians, being pagans, could have deified him as they did to Paro. But instead they looked upon Moshe not as a god in a pantheon, but as an ish, right? So that's what was mentioned before the Medrash Hagadol, that they loved him so much they threw money at him. Vayitein Hashem etchein ha'am b'nei Paro gam ha'ish Moshe. Emphasis ha'ish Moshe gadol ma'od be'eretz Mitzrayim b'nei avdei Paro u'vnei ha'am. So again, the imagination of the Medrash was they threw money at him. But what's important about this? This is in the Chumash Misot Harav. Look at the bottom. It writes Yair Kahn Haggadah. So Yair Kahn is a very good, very big Talmud Chacham, and somebody who I respect a lot. And he's also my brother. And he did not write the Haggadah. He's referring to something that I wrote and never published. And it's available online, but it's a Haggadah of Rav Soloveitchik, and he messed up. He admitted to me later he messed up. I don't know if he ever fixed it in later editions, but he got it wrong. It's probably my parents' fault by having the same letters in my name as my brother Yair's name, just a little in verse. Somebody's dyslexic, they'll get my brother and not me. And over here, he got him. But I want to say something else from Rav Soloveitchik, and with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Now, I'm going to show you something over here. Okay, source 41, Shir Harav and Parshat Bo. But first I want to show you something. And I'm probably going to edit this out of the Shir when you listen online. If you listen afterwards, it's not going to be there because I'm going to take it out because I don't want crazies bothering me. Take a look at this. I'm going to share with you a different document that I have over here. So first of all, look on the bottom left hand. Do you see that? How many pages there are or no? Do you see over here that there are 983 pages to this document? So this is page 799. Okay. So this is a collection of teachings of Rav Soloveitchik on all of the Torah, which I've collected over the years from all kinds of sources that today a lot of them are not accessible, including the date that he gave this year and so on and so forth. Yes, it's 983 pages. When I put together the Haggadah, all that I did is I kept thinking of themes about the Haggadah, and then I searched through my document, and I could do very simple searches, and I put together a Haggadah based upon what I have over here. So now I can stop this, and I can go back to the which is what we were learning from. And this is, the Rav explained, now I remembered this, and I was searching for this, and I didn't see that anybody published this. My father probably remembers it, but let's learn this a little bit, and this is going to help us understand this whole concept on another level. The Rav explained that God was manifesting the concept of kol fenoto ad she'erotzani. So essentially, the Egyptians were divorcing the Jews and they didn't want to give the get, so God forced the way, and that's part of the hardening the heart and so on, but it's also part of giving away your possessions. We apply force to someone until the individual in question comes to self-realization that what is demanded of him is correct, and he expresses his desire to comply. God wanted Paro to recognize on his own the need to send the Jews out of Egypt to comply with the demand of God. As Paro says, "Arise and leave from among my people, also you and also all of Bnei Israel." However, the question remains, why did God prolong the stay of Bnei Israel? Could Paro not have been made to realize this in a shorter interval? The Rav further explained that God wanted Paro not only to allow Bnei Israel to leave Egypt, but to come to respect them as well. As long as they were slaves, Paro thought of them as subhuman. So yes, this is very different from the Rav's great-grandfather, Nitziv, who said that, or great-great-grandfather, who said that, they saw the Jews as being so great. He says, no, they saw them as being so subhuman. You generally, in order to hate somebody, need to dehumanize them. You dehumanize them, then you can do terrible things to them. And he goes, this was the nature of the servitude in Egypt. Chazal say in the verse of who is God that I should listen to him, that Paro searched through his chronicles, unable to find the name of God of Israel mentioned anywhere. What Chazal intended to indicate was that Paro did not consider Bnei Israel a bona fide nation. Therefore, he saw fit to enslave them. The 10 plagues were intended to show Paro that Bnei Israel were a great nation, more so than to punish him in Egypt. Paro was meant to realize that they were not a bunch of insignificant Hebrews. Rather, they were a great national entity. As the Torah says, and afterwards he shall send you out, it does not say, I will take you out. Rather, Paro will realize that you are a great nation and a significant entity, and he will send you out. So before I read further, I just want to point out that part of the problem of slavery is that sometimes the people who enslave others, they dehumanize, but sometimes those who are dehumanized buy into the perception of the other side. And then you see yourself as being unworthy, and you see yourself as being a slave, and you're not even worthy to leave. And maybe that's those people that then report on Moshe. What do you mean? We're slaves. Why you want to mess things up? What are you trying to do over here? We're slaves. Property ownership is extremely important fundamental right and principle according to the Torah. This is best illustrated by the laws of one may defend his home and property from clandestine thieves, and to struggle to protect them even to the extent of taking the life of the thief. Property, material possessions, gives a man self-esteem and self-value. It also commands respect from others. On the other hand, a slave has no property of his own, and whatever he acquires belongs to his master. God told Moshe, when you shall leave, you shall not leave empty-handed. Had Bnei Israel left Egypt without material possessions and wealth, they would have still been looked on as slaves. Therefore, God asked them to demand from the Egyptians items of value as payment for the years of service. Now you see, there's more than one element. One is, we deserve to be paid. But if we deserve to be paid, that means, again, I'm going to say it again, that means we were never really slaves, because you don't have to pay a slave for their service. They demand to be paid. These items were to be taken from their neighbors and housemates, for they were the ones who had taken away their property and self-dignity in the first place. The Rav noted that when Jews were liberated from the concentration camps after the Second World War, they went to the surrounding towns to retrieve their stolen property from the local populace who so eagerly took it from them. And I will give the favor of this people. The Egyptians will come to see you as a nation, a people with dignity, and no longer look upon you as slaves. Some might have thought that the Egyptians chased the Jews out of Egypt because they had become lepers. The Torah tells us just the opposite. They left with tremendous self-respect and dignity. One aspect of this self-respect was the departing with great material wealth. Rechush gadol, v'nitzaltem et Mitzrayim. So I think that's really, enough. It's another line if you want. You shall save your dignity and earn great respect in the eyes of Egyptians, as it says that Moshe gained great respect in the eyes of Egyptians and the house of Paro. Which means that this is another element which was beneath the surface of some of the other things that we had said, that in order for us to become free, see, in the other part, the Rav talked about the halachic part of it, that a slave can't own something. And you realize that was here as well. But he's saying, no, to become free, truly free, you need to regain your dignity. So part of regaining dignity is being paid for the work that you've done. By the way, it's very dignified. Work hard, be paid. There's something dignified about that. There were slaves not deserving of payment. because you're a slave, but pay them on the way out. Pay them, which means the Jews needed to become dignified people in order to become freed from slavery. This is part of the dignity. So the very beginning of the story, just now to wrap things up, the very beginning of the story is the Egyptians look at the Jews and they're disgusting. They are people who are beneath the contempt. They're people who make them, they see them as being inferior. They dehumanize them. And now, in order to become free, to become liberated, you need the exact opposite. Again, these two things are two sides of the same coin. So therefore, the paying of the money, receiving of the gifts is something which will show appreciation, show value, and give dignity. And as we leave with dignity, then we become free. Which means this is part of the redemption, is having the dignity as well. So I hope that the way that I'm explaining this really shows, this story from the beginning until the end, and shows why this is important. And now you think about it, that's what God said from the very beginning. And when you leave, you're going to leave Rechush Gadol. You're going to leave with great wealth. You're going to leave. It's not just you're going to be paid for what you've done. It's much more than an economic issue. It's how the person sees themselves. And again, Moshe is being seen with great esteem. The people now being seen with great respect. This idea, again, whether it's actually a mitzvah to say or they're actually throwing things at Moshe, please take things, forget about the literalness of any of this. What it means is that now the Jews are being held in great esteem, and that helps give them their dignity, and that is part of becoming liberated. And by the way, let's just keep that in mind, maybe on a completely different level. If you think about the mitzvah of tzedakah, the higher the level of tzedakah is, the more dignity the other person has. Which means if you give them, they know who it is and you know who it is, and so there's less dignity. They got money, less dignity. It's anonymous; they don't know who gave it. You know who you're giving to, okay? But still, they know somebody knows. There's less dignity involved in it. If you give them and it's completely anonymous, so there's more dignity. If you give them a job and say that you are of value and I want you to work because I value you, and they get paid for their work, that's the highest level of tzedakah. Why? Because this is the highest level of dignity. Which means in order to give somebody something really of great value, part of that needs to give somebody their dignity, and that is part of leaving Egypt, to leave with dignity. And that's really what the Rav was identifying over here, is that it's a part of the redemption. Yeah, we saw all kinds of, it's a halacha, and he said that as well, but it's more than that. It's a vehicle in order to help us to become free. We need this in order to have our self-esteem. Part of being free people is to have the dignity and the self-esteem, and that's what was necessary at this point. The Egyptians, they deserve to pay every dime of it, right? Maybe it goes all the way back to Yosef. I hope you enjoyed that. This was our money to begin with. This was taken away from us long ago, and they took away our possessions. We're taking it all back. Anyway, I hope that some of this gave slightly a different perspective of what we're normally look at in terms of this. It's not just, they mistreated us and we're taking their money. I think that we were able to see there's a lot more to this.